The lobby of the Grand Aurelius Hotel was silent except for the soft hum of the golden chandelier above. Guests in tailored suits and glittering gowns whispered among themselves, their eyes following the tall, stern-looking billionaire as he strode across the marble floor. His name was Alexander Voss, a man known for making billion-dollar deals before breakfast and breaking them before lunch. He was here for an exclusive business summit, but his attention was caught by something unusual in the corner. Near the glass doors, a young woman in worn clothes stood holding a crumpled piece of paper. Her hair was messy from the wind, her eyes sharp but weary. She didn't look like she belonged here, and the security guards were already moving toward her. Before they could reach her, she stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. "If I translate this, can I eat?" she asked, holding the paper out toward him. Alexander stopped mid-step. He was used to people asking for money, favors, or opportunities, but this was different. Her words sliced through the pretentious air of the lobby, and for a moment, the billionaire had no reply. The security guards froze, glancing at Alexander for instructions. He didn't say a word, only raised a hand to keep them back. His gaze locked on the young woman, as if trying to figure out whether this was some elaborate stunt or a desperate plea. "What did you just say?" His voice was low, but it carried enough weight to silence the entire lobby. She took a cautious step closer, clutching the paper like it was the last thing she owned. "This letter, it's in a language you don't understand, right? I can translate it. But I haven't eaten in 2 days. If I help you, will you buy me a meal?" Gasps and murmurs rippled through the watching crowd. To them, she was just a stranger in worn jeans and scuffed shoes, daring to speak to one of the most powerful men in the city. Alexander's brow furrowed. "Who told you I needed a translation?" Her lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. "Nobody. But I saw you looking at it when you got out of your car. And you frowned." The fact that she noticed something so small unsettled him. Few people caught details about Alexander Voss. He was the one who noticed things about others. For the first time in years, he was curious. Alexander slowly reached into the inner pocket of his tailored coat and pulled out the folded sheet of parchment. The paper was thick, aged, and stamped with an intricate seal. A swirl of faded ink spelled out words in a script most people in the lobby had never seen before. "You're telling me, you can read this?" he asked, holding it just out of her reach. She nodded without hesitation. "Every word." A murmur passed through the onlookers, some pulling out their phones to record the scene. The tension in the air was sharp. This wasn't the kind of interaction people expected from a man like Alexander Voss. "What language is it?" he pressed. She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. "If I tell you, you'll think you can find someone else to do it cheaper. And then I'll still be hungry." Alexander felt the corners of his mouth twitch, not quite a smile, but the faintest hint of being impressed. This young woman was negotiating with him in front of a crowd, and she didn't even flinch. "You're bold," he said quietly. "I'm starving," she replied, her voice steady. "Boldness is all I have left." For a moment, Alexander weighed his options. He could dismiss her, have security escort her out, and forget the incident entirely. But something in her tone, that raw mix of defiance and desperation, made him pause. Finally, he extended the paper toward her. "Translate it. And yes, you'll eat." She took the parchment carefully, as though it were made of glass. Her fingers were trembling, not from fear, but from hunger and exhaustion. She studied the ornate writing for a moment, her lips moving silently as she pieced it together. Alexander crossed his arms, watching her with a mix of skepticism and intrigue. The crowd leaned in, the sound of clinking glasses and distant music from the ballroom fading as the lobby became a stage. "It's a personal letter," she began, her voice low but clear. "From someone you haven't seen in many years. Someone who still thinks about you." Alexander's eyes sharpened. "Go on." She swallowed hard, her gaze flicking between the letter and his face. "They write about a promise you made. Something you left unfinished, and they're asking if you remember. His jaw tightened. Only a handful of people in the world knew about that promise, and none of them were in this room. The young woman glanced down again, her brow furrowing. There's more. A request, and a warning. They say time is running out. The billionaire's pulse quickened. He reached out instinctively, but she pulled the letter slightly back. You promised me a meal, she reminded him softly. I'll finish after I've eaten. For the first time in years, Alexander Voss, the man who always controlled every negotiation, found himself at the mercy of someone else. A ripple of disbelief passed through the lobby. No one, had ever dared to bargain with Alexander Voss this way. Yet here she was, holding a letter that clearly meant something to him, and refusing to finish until her hunger was addressed. Alexander studied her face for a long moment. She wasn't bluffing. Her eyes were steady, and there was no sign of intimidation despite the dozens of people watching. Fine, he said at last, his voice low but firm. You'll eat. Now. He gestured to one of the hotel staff, a nervous young man in a crisp uniform. Take her to the dining hall. Whatever she orders, put it on my account. The woman hesitated, glancing at the guards. And my letter? Alexander's mouth twitched in irritation. You'll keep it until you've eaten. But when you're done, you finish the translation, word for word. She gave a small nod, clutching the parchment as though it were both her lifeline and her leverage. The crowd began to disperse, whispering about the strange exchange. Some assumed she was a con artist. Others suspected there was far more to the letter than Alexander wanted anyone to know. As she followed the waiter toward the dining hall, Alexander's eyes stayed on her until she disappeared from view. He didn't like being at someone else's mercy, but something told him this wasn't just a coincidence. Somehow, she knew exactly which wound to press. The dining hall was nearly empty at this hour, its crystal chandeliers casting warm light across polished tables. The young woman sat down, still gripping the letter like a sacred relic. The waiter handed her a menu, but she barely glanced at it before saying, something hot. And plenty of it. While the staff hurried to prepare her meal, she unfolded the parchment again, scanning the words with an intensity that made it clear she was reading more than just sentences, she was reading between them. Meanwhile, in the lobby, Alexander stood by the massive window overlooking the city. His mind was far from the view. That letter had arrived in his private mail that morning, delivered by hand with no return address. The handwriting was one he had not seen in over a decade. Back in the dining hall, steaming plates began to arrive, soup, bread, roasted vegetables, a small steak. The woman didn't waste time on pleasantries, she ate like someone who had been counting the hours since her last real meal. But even between bites, her eyes kept returning to the letter. When the plates were finally empty, she pushed them aside and stood. The waiter tried to collect her dishes, but she held the parchment tight and walked toward the lobby. Alexander turned the moment he heard her footsteps. Well, he asked. She stopped just a few feet away, her voice quiet but steady. I'll tell you everything, she said. But you're not going to like what you hear. The air between them felt heavier now, as though every whisper in the lobby had been swallowed by an invisible silence. Alexander's gaze locked onto hers. Start talking, he said. She unfolded the parchment again, running her finger lightly under the words. The letter says the person who wrote it is in trouble, serious trouble. They don't have much time left. And they claim, you're the only one who can help. Alexander's jaw tightened. Who is it? Her eyes flicked up from the page, studying him. The name isn't written here, at least not in a way you'd recognize. But the writer gives details, very personal ones. Memories from years ago. His mind raced. Memories meant leverage, and leverage meant whoever sent this knew exactly how to get his attention. They mention a meeting on a rainy night, a promise under a streetlight, and that you never came back. Alexander's breath caught, just for a moment. That night had been buried deep in his past, under layers of deals, distractions, and deliberate forgetting. The woman hesitated before reading the next part. They say if you ignore this, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. And they give a location, a place you're supposed to be at before midnight tomorrow. Her voice softened. It's not far from here, but it sounds dangerous. Alexander stepped closer. Why bring this to me? Why not just give it to the police? She folded the letter slowly, slipping it into her pocket. Because the police wouldn't care. And because, she paused, almost as if deciding whether to reveal the truth. I have my own reason for wanting you to go. Alexander's eyes narrowed. Your own reason? This isn't just about the letter, is it? The young woman held his gaze, unflinching. No. It's about what's connected to it. The person who wrote this, they once saved my life. And now they're asking for yours. Her words landed like a quiet explosion. He studied her face for any sign of deceit, but all he saw was a steady determination that didn't match her worn clothes or hungry frame. And you expect me to just walk into this situation? He asked, his tone guarded. She tilted her head. You're Alexander Voss. I've read enough about you to know you don't run from things, you crush them. Unless, she added with the faintest smirk, you've been lying to the world all these years. The jab hit its mark. No one dared question his resolve, not business rivals, not politicians, not even people who had everything to lose. Yet here she was, forcing him to prove something. Alexander exhaled slowly. If I go, you're coming with me. You clearly know more than you're saying. She didn't flinch. Fine. But there's one thing you should understand first. He raised an eyebrow. And what's that? Her expression hardened. This isn't just about saving someone. It's about uncovering something you've spent years trying to forget. A flicker of something, annoyance, maybe even unease, passed over Alexander's face. You talk as if you've read my mind, he said. The young woman's voice was calm, almost too calm. I don't need to read your mind. The letter already did that for me. She handed the parchment back to him. He took it slowly, his fingers brushing the worn edges, the faded ink like a ghost of the past clawing its way back. You said the location was close, he said finally. Where? A warehouse by the docks, she replied without hesitation. The old Whitlock Pier. You'll recognize it, even if you wish you didn't. The name hit him like a blow. Whitlock Pier wasn't just a location. It was a graveyard of bad memories, a place where he'd once made a choice that had shaped his entire empire, and had cost someone dearly. Alexander's voice was quieter now. If this is some kind of setup, it's not, she interrupted. If it were, you'd already be finished. This is a warning. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of unspoken history between them. Finally, Alexander tucked the letter back into his coat and straightened his posture. Tomorrow night, he said. We go together. Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. Good. Because whether you realize it or not, you need me there. The next night, the city's skyline shimmered under a blanket of fog. Down by the waterfront, the old Whitlock Pier looked abandoned, its wooden planks weathered, its rusted cranes frozen like skeletal sentinels. Alexander stepped out of a sleek black sedan, his coat collar turned up against the chill. The young woman was already there, leaning against a lamppost, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. You're on time, she said, a hint of surprise in her voice. I don't keep people waiting, he replied curtly. Especially not when my name's been dragged into something like this. They walked toward the warehouse, the sound of their footsteps echoing against the quiet docks. The building loomed ahead, its faded paint peeling, one door hanging slightly ajar. Alexander glanced at her. So, what's inside? Another letter? A trap? She didn't answer right away. Instead, She pushed the door open and stepped into the darkness, her silhouette disappearing into the shadows. He followed, his eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through cracked windows. The smell of saltwater mixed with dust filled the air. Somewhere in the distance, a chain creaked. Then a voice, low, strained, and all too familiar, echoed from the far corner. "You came, finally." Alexander froze. That voice belonged to someone he thought he'd never hear again. Someone who, years ago, had vanished without a trace. Alexander's pulse quickened as his eyes adjusted to the shadows. A figure emerged from the far corner, older now, thinner, but unmistakable. "Elias," Alexander said quietly. The name felt heavy on his tongue. The man gave a faint, bitter smile. "Didn't think you'd remember." The young woman stayed near the door, watching their every move. "He got your letter," she said softly. Elias's gaze shifted to her, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, familiarity, maybe even gratitude. Then his eyes returned to Alexander. "You left me here," Elias said, his voice hardening. "You made your deal and walked away. And I paid the price." Alexander's jaw clenched. "You disappeared. I thought you were dead." Elias let out a dry laugh. "Dead? No. I was buried under your mistakes, Alexander. But now, I'm giving you a chance to fix them." Alexander stepped closer, his tone sharp. "And what exactly do you want from me?" Elias reached into his coat and pulled out a small metal case. "Inside this, is proof that could destroy you. But it could also save me, and a lot of other people." The room went silent, except for the faint drip of water somewhere in the distance. Elias's voice lowered. "The question is, which one will you choose?" Alexander stared at the metal case in Elias's hands. It was small enough to fit in a pocket, yet it felt as if the weight of his entire empire was inside it. "What's in there?" he asked, his voice tight. Elias didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned the case over in his hands like a gambler considering whether to play his final card. "Documents. Names. Transactions. Every deal you ever made with the people you've been pretending don't exist." The young woman took a step forward, her expression sharp. "And if the wrong person gets that, it won't just ruin Alexander. It'll hurt everyone caught in the crossfire." Alexander's eyes flicked to her. "You knew about this?" She met his gaze without flinching. "I knew there was something worth risking everything for. Elias saved my life once, this is my way of paying him back. But I also know you, Alexander. You'll never let yourself be cornered, unless you choose to be." The silence stretched. Finally, Alexander extended his hand. "Give it to me." Elias's eyes narrowed. "Not until you promise, in front of her, that you'll use it to clean up the mess, not cover it up." Alexander hesitated. The old version of himself would have laughed, taken the case, and buried it forever. But tonight, with the weight of both their eyes on him, something shifted. "I promise," he said, his voice steady. Elias handed him the case. "Then fix it." Alexander took it and turned toward the young woman. "You said you wanted a meal yesterday. From now on, you'll have more than that." For the first time, her lips curved into a real smile. "I'll hold you to that, Voss." And as they stepped out into the cold night, Alexander knew the promise he'd just made would change everything, for him, for them, and for the empire he'd built.